anytime we're pursuing goodness at the expense of wholeness, we're going to end up going sideways and off the rails.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Byproduct Podcast. I am Ian Pruckner, your host, and hey, when we get better, things get better, right? So thank you so much for joining me, and I am very, very excited today about our guest, Britt Frank. Britt, how are you? What's going on?
Hi, I am so great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have Britt. Britt is a licensed psychotherapist and the author of a book called The Science of Stuck, Breaking Through Inertia to Find Your Path Forward. And Britt, I read voraciously. You know, leaders are readers. Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. I read a lot, and I absolutely loved your book. I don't read a lot of books that I can say I love. I read some books that have a few good things and 180 pages of fluff that their editor made them put in. This book was fantastic. And so I am really honored to have you on. I know that our audience is going to get a lot of value out of this. So really quickly, though, I want to tell you a funny story. I actually came across your book in sort of a bizarre way. I opened up the mail one day. I had a package from a good friend of mine. He's a national sales director with a large publicly traded company. And he doesn't, much often send me gifts. It's not like a normal guy thing to do. And so I open, and here's your book, The Science of Stuck. And he wrote me a little note. He said, "This is one of the best books I've read in a long time. I think you're going to get some value out of it." And he's a good friend of mine, so I decided to pick it up. And I thought it was absolutely amazing. So you're a licensed psychotherapist. You got a lot of education here in the mind, in the way the brain works. And one of the things I loved about this book is that you wrote from a place, what I would consider like extreme authenticity. In fact, a lot of what you covered here is stuff that you had challenges with and came through those challenges, and you were providing a lot of the tools that helped you get unstuck. And I think stuck, if we're being honest, is a place that most people are most of the time in some place in their life. And like, man, if you can crack the code to how do we move forward? How do we break through where we are and get to where we need to be? I think that's very powerful, and I think that you've done that. Talk a little bit about your story, if you would. Give our audience a little bit of a picture of who's Britt Frank, where did you come from, why did you write this book, and what is that fire on the inside of you that's giving you this passion here?
So on my, marketing materials, when I'm talking to businesses, I have my shiny resume, which is I went to Duke and I have a master's degree and I'm an award-winning adjunct professor and blah, 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 and trauma trained and I also have my sordid resume, which is I was a drug addict and a relationship addict and a codependent and a hot, disastrous mess of a person with a DSM diagnosis list that was not short and just really a train wreck of a human being. And so in my finding my way out of that mess, I sort of compiled my show and tell of here are the best, the book is not, here's Britt's opinion on how you should live your life. It's, hey, everybody, I've read all the books, so you don't have to. So here's just the most important information from my top 50 resources. So you can have everything in one place. Because I wish I had that. If I had that when I was 20, I still would have been a train wreck, but I would have at least had a guide to get started.
Yeah, no, one of the things that I love, because you're right, it's not opinion. It's here's a lot of fact, here's a lot of research, here's the top opinions, and here's how I've seen them work both in my life and in the clients that I've been able to serve. The thing that I found most interesting, Britt, about your book is you take on a lot of topics, anxiety, addiction, relationships, some of the things that people are largely disabled by, not in a physical sense, but emotionally, and being able to move forward. And your perspective on a few of these things was just really, really refreshing. And you talk about stuck, and I want to paraphrase this. People look at stuck and they think like that's a bad thing. Like, I don't know why I can't figure this out. I can't seem to break through. I keep hitting my head. I want to change, but I can't. What's wrong with me? And I think the biggest thing that I took from this book is nothing is wrong with you. The perspective that you had that stuck is satisfying. It's satisfying something in you. There are things that are right that are causing this. And if you'll learn to understand that, then you can start from a place of power and control instead of a place of maybe feeling ashamed or guilty or that something is wrong with you when it's not. It's something right with you that's maybe not being well controlled or well understood. And I think that that is so absolutely powerful. I want to ask you this question. You have something in the book called the 4 P's of stuck, right? The 4 perks of staying stuck. And you basically said, stuck is providing value to you. That's why you stay there. That's why it's there for so many people. And I thought it's so incredible. You said it prevents discomfort, it protects you from emotions, it promotes connection, and it points to problems. Talk a little bit about that idea that, hey, stuck is actually serving you in some way. That's why it's there.
So people don't like that. And when I say that stuck is serving a purpose, I'm not saying it's good or I'm co-signing on it or you should just resign yourself to staying
So
stuck.
powerful.
Like, no, I am saying that the behavior serves a function or it wouldn't be present. Like nothing comes out of nowhere. And if things weren't serving a function, they wouldn't continue to be sticky. And so if we're not willing to acknowledge, and again, without shaming ourselves, acknowledging that if you stay stuck, you're not risking financial resources. It is a fact. If you don't launch a business, you don't have to risk your finances. That doesn't mean it's good, and that doesn't mean the payoff is good. It does mean that is a benefit. If you don't get fit, you don't have to worry that your relationships are all going to have to change and everything about how you do life is going to have to change. It's not a good thing, but it is a benefit. And failure to acknowledge the benefits of staying stuck will keep us stuck. And a lot of people do this, oh my God, I'm a terrible person because I'm benefiting, or clutches at pearls. How could you say such things? And it's not about shame and it's not about judgment. It's about let's understand the brain so we can affect change quickly, efficiently. It's like if you put me behind the car, I don't drive a stick. If you put me in a car with stick shift, it's not going to go well. And that's not because the car is bad. And it's not because there's anything fundamentally flawed about the engine. Is I don't know how to drive that car. And our brains are the same way. If we know how to drive, we're not going to be crashing and burning through transmissions or whatever.
I mean, we could probably talk for hours about this. I've had the privilege of helping to lead, tens of thousands of entrepreneurs and leaders, and the brain and how the brain works and why we do what we do, and more importantly, why we don't do what we should do. It is a subject that has fascinated me. I wrote a book on that subject, and when I saw that, I said, yes, that is truth right there. And I love what you said. I'm not condoning it. It's not good, but it is. And if you won't face that truth that there are benefits to you staying in your situation, right, then you won't be able to overcome it because you're going to be turning over all sorts of rocks that have nothing to do with the things that are actually keeping you in place. When we can acknowledge those truths that I am benefiting in some ways from this stuck, now we know where those attachments and those anchors really are and how we can work to overcome them to get to where we need to be. I absolutely love it. Let's talk really quickly about the shadow. Okay, so the shadow is another topic. Man, I have watched so many people ruin their lives because they don't understand the concept of the shadow that you talk about. And I come from a ministry background, and it's an interesting and probably controversial topic in some ways here. But I think this is an absolute truth that you have not discovered, but named, described, provided some insight to. Talk to me about the shadow, the good, the bad, and the WTF. Let's talk a little bit about that.
And so I have a church background as well. I'm a New York Jew, but I had a very extensive church background. That's a whole nother story. And the dilemma in the church world is that some of these concepts are considered taboo. Yeah. And the shadow is not this woo-woo, mystical, esoteric, spiritual thing. If you think of nature, shadows are created when light is blocked. If an object is blocking the light, it's going to cast a shadow. Psychological shadows simply mean there are areas of our awareness that we're not clear on, or we're ashamed of, or we've repressed, or we've shoved down, or we don't want to deal with, or we're afraid to encounter. And when and a lot of, like, the inner critic is a big one. A lot of people will say, well, I just need to banish that voice. I just need to cast that voice out of my head and get rid of it. And it's like, yeah, but there are nuggets of truth in even our most persistent bad habits. And I say this as I smoked meth. So I'm certainly not saying that that's a good thing. I am saying that there were nuggets of things in that behavior to suppress truth that I didn't want to deal with.
Yeah.
And it's like, without knowledge, we die. So it's so important to know that shadow work simply means stop lying to yourself about yourself and do it without shame. And then things change.
So powerful, because there are these pieces in all of us that we'd rather not see and that we'd rather not acknowledge. So we shove it down, we ignore it, we pretend it's not there. But the truth is, it's there. It's part of us. It's there for some reason, as good, bad, or ugly as it might be. And again, what I've watched so many people do is they, instead of acknowledging it and then dealing with it, working with it, molding it into something positive potentially, right? We ignore it, we repress it, and then eventually it rears its head in a way that is outside of our control. And I think that that's so powerful. I think high achievers in basically every world have this sort of place inside of them. You know, Tim Grover talks about that a little bit in one of his books, you know, this dark place on the inside. And great achievers learn how to, they acknowledge it, they work with it, and they use it to their strength. It's not something that they hide from. You know, but I just thought it was so powerful, because when that shadow is left unattended, right, it can show up in ways that are not positive. And one of the things that was so interesting, you know, I have a 14-year-old daughter right now going on 22, right? Okay. And she's like figuring out the world, and she's, you know, in positions where she's got to make her own choices, and and you know, she, like all kids, is, you know, sometimes as parents we look and say, well, I don't understand the choices you're making. And it's one of those things where we can like hold her back, and we can protect her and shield her, right, and keep her from these parts of herself, right? But we've all seen what happens to those kids when they're 18 and they go to school for the first time, and they've never been introduced to that shadow part, and things get real crazy, right? So it's like this balance of how do you work with it? You acknowledge it. And so some of your strategies there I thought were fantastic, right, that you talked about. Do you want to go into just a second, like, how do you deal with this shadow place on the inside? What are some of the ways that you've seen that work well to, hey, take some of that energy and harness it?
So we need to take this like binary of I'm a good person, and if I'm not a good person, I'm a bad person, and toss that.
Wow.
It's so simple and reductive, and it's not accurate. Anytime we're pursuing goodness at the expense of wholeness, we're going to end up going sideways and off the rails. And that's true with success too. I work with a lot of successful, high achieving people in my private practice. But if you are focused on success at the expense of your entire truth, you're going to be miserable. Like, yeah, you're going to have the successful company and the multi-billion-dollar whatever, but what's the point of achieving success if you're not a whole person? Because happiness is like, you can't be happy if you're not whole. You know, we think once I'm happy, I'll feel like a whole person. And it's no, once you acknowledge your shadow and you integrate all of these parts of yourself, that is the antecedent to being happy. And so how do you do this? The number one way to approach your shadow stuff is to take the, oh my God, how did I think that thought? I'm a terrible person. What does this mean about me? All thoughts are free. Like, thoughts don't cause harm until they are acted upon either unconsciously in behaviors and habits or by a decision. But if you notice, like, we've all had thoughts that make us cringe and be like, oh my God, I hope no one saw or heard what is going through my head right now. And if you can get curious, the solution to this whole shadow thing is curiosity, because curiosity cannot coexist with shame. And if you can get curious about your shadows, about those weird sideways things that you think and go, that's interesting that my brain just created that thought or that judgment or that whatever. And then when we're curious, we have mobility. When we're in judgment, we're frozen, we're stuck. When we're in shame, we're frozen, we're stuck. When we're in curiosity, that provides us mobility, and that gives us energy to then move from stuck to go, and then from go to, yay, I'm doing my life on my terms and everything is great.
Yeah, that's so powerful, right? The dichotomy of good and bad. And the truth is, fundamentally, as human beings, we are all a little bit of both all of the time, contrary to what we might want to show people or the lies we tell ourselves. And I think that that's a powerful way to be able to move away from that and say, I am not bad because these things exist. I need to acknowledge them and figure out, hey, where are these coming from? How could they help me? And how do I keep them under control? If they are a part of me, how do I how do I serve that? And I love so many times in the book, you're like, hey, I'm not celebrating this. I'm not telling you take this dark part of yourself and go let it out of control. But I'm also not saying you shove this in the dark and pretend it doesn't exist, because it's there, right? And it can help. Let's talk about the 6 myths of friendship. You know, it's I got so much value out of this, right? Because you hear you hear all, we're not meant to do life alone, and that's true, right? Like we get a lot of value out of these relationships, and you talk about it, but I think you took a lot of like the stigma out of friendship, especially adult friendships, right? Because like people who know me well, I'm an introvert, a big time introvert by nature. Like I'm like me, myself, I'm that kid, Britt, in junior year science class where we get put in a group science project. And I'm like, you 3 morons, you go sit in the corner and enjoy your day, and I'm going to do this myself because we're going to get an A, and I don't want to deal with your bull crap, right? And that's sort of always how I've been. And so I have this this huge world of acquaintances and people I know, reasonably well, and I have this very, very, very small world of these real intimate friends, and so I got a lot of value out of some of your 6 myths of adult friendship. I want to read them really quickly, and then if you don't mind jumping in on a couple of them that maybe stick out to you. But the 6 myths of adult friendships. Number 1 is good friends give advice. All right, like that you've got to be constantly spouting your 2 cents. Number 2, adult friendships should be easy and natural, and that is anything but true. Number 3, and this was so warming to my heart, you need a best friend. That set me free, Britt. I was, just living my best life that day that I read that was a myth, that I do not need a best. You have to invest a lot of time or you're a bad friend. Number 5, you have to have real life friends. Social media doesn't count. And number 6, friends are forever. And I think there's so much pretense around all this stuff that you're addressing here, that it's like it wears you out, and it's like having a friend is so much work. It's like, oh, I'm such a terrible person because I don't have all this time. And I feel like, man, that list of 6, it gave me permission to do friends my way and be okay with it, and say, these are relationships that I can get value out of and give value into and be enriched by without having to have this laundry list of what should be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we're not taught how to transition from children to adults in any area, like not with finances, not with intimacy, not with anything, but particularly with friendships. We grow up and at some point we're adults, poof, and now we think that the rules of childhood friendships apply to our adult friendships. I need a best friend and we need to see each other every day and we tell each other everything and friends are forever. None of that stuff is either true, necessary, nor is it appropriate as an adult to make those things requirements for our friendships. I'm an introvert as well, and I'm a therapist, so I am with people having very heavy conversations for hours a day, every day. My dear, close inner circle friends know I love you, I care about you, but I need you to leave me alone 99% of the time. And when we're with each other, I'm in it, I'm with you, I'm here, but don't text me, I love you, don't text me, I'm not texting you back, I love you, definitely don't call me, I have phone phobia and I won't answer my phone. And people who understand me and are in my circle don't have a problem with that. The trouble with friendships is when we want to try to wrestle a friend who is not wired for a certain role into that role. So if someone wanted me to be available every day to chat on the phone and go to all the things and go to all the events, that relationship's going to be high conflict and contentious. Doesn't have to be. It requires a thorough, honest inventory of what roles are the people in your life cast in. Are those roles appropriate for who they are? And how can you reconfigure your friend circle so it works with how you're wired? Like, yeah, it's weird that I need to be left alone 99% of the time. Okay, so what? That's me. And some people are wired where they need lots of contact. There's nothing wrong with either. It's just know thyself, and your friends need to be able to harmonize with you. Yeah. Otherwise, it's high conflict. It's
okay to be yourself and to have your relationship needs and to put those as a priority in how you relate with people. And again, it's just so freeing, that last one, right? Friends are forever. Some friends are forever. but a lot aren't. You know, one of the things that I always love teaching the people that I lead is, you know, relationships and friends come into your life, some for a reason, some for a season, and some forever. And you've got to be wise enough to know and be okay with those differences, so that you don't get burnt out on people, right? You don't get jaded and cynical towards them, because not everybody is a forever friend. Some people are there to get you from point A to point B. Some people are there to meet a need in your life for some period of time, or for you to meet a need in their life. And that's okay. And that doesn't make you a bad person or a bad friend or ineligible for meaningful relationships, right? And so I absolutely love that. Let's talk about the A word, addiction. And you know, I, like you, I would imagine, having read your book, I'm an addictive personality, right? Okay, so like when I find something, I'm like, let's do that thing, like too much of it, or have it. And you talk again in sort of the voicing of this book about things that I've never heard people talk about when it comes to things like addiction, right? And that there's a functionality there. Your addiction is serving a need, and it's not condoning it, it's not celebrating it necessarily, but it's understanding the truth of it, right? And when you know the truth will set you free, right? And so there's some serious truth that you talked about in that section on addictions. Talk to us a little bit about the functionality of addiction. Like, you know, this is serving a purpose. It's deeper than you think. And that's why it's harder to get rid of than you think sometimes, right?
So the origins of addiction is no one really knows. Is it genetics? Is it nature? Is it nurture? It's probably a combination. But just because you have a genetic predisposition to addiction does not mean you are now doomed to become an addict forever. So I sort of stay away from what's the origin? What is the nature? Let's just look at the behavior.
Yeah.
I have never, as an addict and as someone who has treated a lot of people, I have never seen an addiction show up out of nowhere, serving absolutely no function. Regardless of its origin, addiction is a flight from painful truth. Addiction is a way that our system has adapted. It's not good, it's suboptimal, but it's an adaptation to avoid pain or to cope with a reality that's intolerable, or in some form or fashion protecting us from something. And again, failure to acknowledge the function of a behavior render us incapable of changing that behavior long term.
Right.
And so addiction is not good, it's functional. And so the disease model is very tricky, because if it's just I have a disease and this is who I am, and I'm not saying don't take medication, I'm not saying don't go to therapy, I do all of the things. I have a long history of severe mental illness, both sides of my family, thank you generations of whatever. But you know, it does not mean there's something disordered about you. It means that your pain, for whatever reason, lack of access to information, lack of access to resources, it adapted. It's like you break your leg. If you don't set the leg, you're going to limp. Addiction is a way that our system has adapted to something uncomfortable, unpleasant, or dangerous. And failure to acknowledge that, again, is going to make it very, very difficult to sustain long-term recovery. I do not identify as an addict now. There are some models that say once an addict, always an addict. I don't identify as I am an addict. It's like, yeah, I don't do drugs anymore, but I'm not fully sober. I don't identify as an addict when I tell, and again, this isn't true for everyone. Not everyone has the same resources, privilege, or access. But when you tend to the pain points to the degree that you're able, the addiction's function ceases to exist. And then the behavior, it's not like you get healed. It's just you outgrow the necessity to cover your pain in that way.
So, you know, the addiction, in other words, is the symptom in many ways, right? It's the symptom. And the underlying illness is these things that it's serving. And if we don't address those things, you know, it's like the vacuum theory, right? So in a vacuum, something's going to come in and fill that. And so you might have an addiction that's serving purpose A, B, and C. And if you don't address thing A, B, and C, you might kick addiction 1. And in addictions 1's place will come addiction 2. It's some other way of coping with A, B, and C, those original sort of causes. And I love that because, again, it's something that I've never heard it explained that way, but it is totally true. That thing in our life that can be many times so destructive that's not there for no reason, like you said. Didn't just pop out of nowhere. It's serving a purpose. Well, what is that purpose it's serving? If we can address and meet those needs in other ways, then, as you just so eloquently said, the addiction sort of becomes purposeless at that point. And that's when we outgrow those things. And I thought, wow, how powerful is that? And how much good could that do in the lives of people who are trapped inside of things they can't figure out how to get out of? To be able to have that perspective and look at it in a different way.
Yes, and I want to put a caveat on this, because when I say outgrow
Sure.
it, I can already see the DMs I'm going to get. Like, it's not a character. When I say outgrow, I mean neurologically, the neural pathway that created the addiction. It's not that like you're now a better person. It's that you've now
Yeah.
created a different set of neural pathways, so your brain can go this way instead of
It doesn't
that
follow
way. So
the
it's literally
pathway.
growing.
Yeah.
Right.
You literally outgrew synaptically,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like in your brain chemistry, it found a different path to meet the need.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's fantastic. I wish we had some more time, because I have like 7 or 8 other questions I'd love to ask you. So couple of things here. Who is Little B? You have a on the first page, sort of like a dedicated to, it just says for Little B. I think I know who Little B is, but I'd be interested to know who Little B really is, see if I'm right or not.
Little B is my little child self that grew up in such chaos and confusion and bewilderment and believing so many things and being terrorized every second of every day. Little B, hi, welcome home. So the book is for her.
Yeah. When I saw that, it gave me goosebumps, right? Because here is somebody who doesn't have it all figured out, like none of us do. But here's somebody who's come through a lot, and come through and said, I'm going to bring some other people through. And then writes this memoir of sorts and dedicates it to her child self, right? And I thought, wow, how powerful is that, to be able to look back from all you've gone through, all you've learned, all that you've overcome, and be able to say, this is for you. Because there are some other little bees out there, right, that hopefully get a hold of some of this information and can be further ahead, better empowered, better equipped, having better tools with which to resource themselves in their journeys, right? So I that's what I thought. It was an accurate prediction. It was very, very powerful. Britt, if you had, I'm going to ask you two questions here to close out. If you had one message that you wanted to boil this all down to, that somebody could take in a soundbite and say, you know what, that was something I needed to hear at this point in my life, right? What would that message be to the people that are watching or listening right now? From all your research, from all the things you overcome, what would that one idea be that you want people to know, put into their hearts, and take into their lives with them tomorrow?
There is no such thing as a crazy person. There is no such thing as a crazy person. You are not crazy. Crazy is not a thing. You are not crazy. You make sense. Your stuff makes sense. When you understand it, we can change it. There is no such thing as crazy.
Wow, so powerful on that. One of the things, having written a book as well, working on a second book, one of the things that happens, we're always growing, we're always learning, we're always becoming more. And one of the best questions somebody ever asked me, I want to ask you, and that is, in hindsight, so the book came out when?
March of this year. March. Of 22.
So you probably finished writing it some point a year and a half ago, and then went through. Okay, so there's been an elapsation of time, so to speak, right? And so you're growing, you're journeying, you probably getting into some different outlets than you're normally in because of the book. What is one thing that you have looked at now in the last year and a half since you finished writing that you said, you know what, I really wish this would have been in the book. Now that I've learned this, or I've experienced it, or I've seen it full circle, what would that one editor update be if we could put something else in here based on your growth over the last year and a half?
Well, fortunately, I'm working on book number 2, and so this will be in book number 2. And the area I did not touch in the Science of Stuck that will be in book 2 is money.
Okay.
our beliefs
Fantastic.
about money, the functionality of under earning, the functionality of what we call self sabotage in business, the functionality of procrastination, management, how all of these psych concepts are incredibly applicable to the business world. If you don't understand family dynamics, you're not going to be able to manage a team. If you
Yeah.
don't understand money beliefs and hidden money beliefs, it's going to be difficult to do what you want to do in your business. So that's all going in the next one.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, the book is super applicable to business, to entrepreneurs, to leadership. I mean, if just any human being, I think, would get value out of this. So really quickly, the book again is called The Science of Stuck. Guys, listen, you know I don't normally make like hard recommendations on a book. You need to get this, okay? It is absolutely worth the read. And then, Britt, how can people connect with you online, right? So they get the book, they love it, they watch this time together, they said, you know what, I want to know more about Britt, I want to follow her, I want to get some more content. How do they follow you? What's your Instagram? Where else can they get some value and some connection with you moving forward?
Things. Come say hi to me on Instagram, where I have terrible boundaries and I'm on there all the time. So it's just my name at Britt Frank, and Britt has 2 T's. The website is scienceofstuck.com, and I'm always talking to people, speaking on podcasts, doing wordy things because I love to talk about this stuff all day long. So I'm out in the interwebs.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, guys, listen, make sure to go follow Britt now. Give her a follow, connect with her, share her content. It is so valuable for so many people. Britt, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time. It really has been a lot of fun this morning. I wish we had some more time to get together. Hopefully we can do this again in the future. And to everybody, again, thank you so much for watching the Byproduct Podcast. When we get better, things get better. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.